Hey, welcome back to the Programming Fundamentals course. Today we're going to look at the idea of creating objects, and specifically we're going to choose dice. So as you can see on my screen, we have two six-sided dice. What we're going to do is create a way to simulate these in Java. Now when we're creating a new class, we need to think about what exactly is it that we want to create. So let's just take some notes here as we're going. So if I'm going to, there we go. I'm going to create a new class. Every class is going to have the same types of things. So we have a class name, we have attributes of the class, and we have methods. Every class will have those same things. So in this case, if we're going to create a class to represent dice, then I think a good name for it would be dice. And when we think about the attributes of dice, we have to think about, well, what is it that we know about them? Now, typical board games have six-sided dice, which are like the ones in my picture. But there are other types of dice out there. So, for example, I believe you can get 12 and 20-sided dice. Let's just take a quick. Have to research our products before we can build them, right? So let's see, multi-sided dice. So if we look, it looks like there's lots of different styles of dice out there, right? So 20-sided dice or 8-sided dice. So we need to be able to capture, this one looks like it has at least 28 sides. So we need to be able to capture that concept. So one of the attributes would be the number of sides. That'd be one attribute for the dice. Another attribute for a die is whenever they stop rolling, eventually you get this idea, like you can see here, there's a number that's on top. That's the number, in this case, 6. Or over here, the number would be 20. No matter how you use the dice, there's always that same common element that they stop and some face is showing, like 12, 20, 6. So here we have this idea of each dice has an attribute of its face value. Let's just put some spaces in here. And then we have to think about, well, how do you use the dice? What are the methods that we may want? Well, the most common thing that people think of with dice is rolling. So roll the die, roll the dice. And then one that's maybe less intuitive for us is the idea that the dice, they're actually telling us something here when they stop rolling. They show the value of the side that's up. So we have this idea of getting the face value. Right? So each die actually does return to the user whatever its face value is. Now we're just, as humans, we don't think about that as an actual special activity, but it is. I mean, if these dice didn't have the numbers painted on them, you wouldn't really know which side is up. So that's it. That's pretty much all we need to build our dice class. We could include attributes such as color, white base, black lettering, things like that, or black base, white lettering. But for the purposes of this little video, I don't think that that's going to actually matter to us because we don't have a visual representation of our dice. So really all we care about is what side is facing up and being able to roll them again. So let's go into NetBeans. And I'm going to create a new project, new Java application. And I'm going to call this dice. Make this a little bigger for everybody. Okay. So, as we said, we have a class name called dice. So here on line 8, you can see public class dice. And it's always uppercase with class names. You shouldn't make any classes with a lowercase letter. It's a common convention in programming. The next thing is we have this idea of attributes. So when I create the attributes, I always want to make them private because I want only the dice class to be able to modify these Often it's okay for others to be able to read them, but you definitely don't want uncontrolled access on how you can modify them. So the easiest way to do that is to make them private. And in this case, number of sides. So if I look at all these different examples of dice, 6-sided dice, maybe that one's a 12-sided dice, I think that one's a 12-sided dice as well. These are all whole numbers. So a good choice for data type is integer. And then let's just call it num of sides. And then the other, the other thing we said is whatever the current face value is. So also those are always whole numbers. So let's say present int face value. Okay, so these are global variables. They're inside of our class, which means every method will be able to access them. And these are, I also look at these as instance variables, meaning I'm only going to set these if I have an instance of my class, if I create new dice. So in order to create any new objects, I need to have something called a constructor. A constructor is a special type of method that gets called whenever we create a new object. So I'm going to make it public so that it can be called outside of my class. And then the constructor is special. It has to have the exact same name as the class. Okay? No other method should do this, but the constructor does. And then the last thing is I need to know, the initial state of my dice. Now in this case, usually, if you're thinking of games and stuff, you would always know what type of dice you want. I want 6-sided dice if I'm playing Monopoly. Maybe I want 20-sided if I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons. So in here, we need to pass in the number of sides. So I'm going to say int number of sides. This tells the computer to reserve space for an integer, and that in order to call this constructor, I have to pass in a certain number of sides. So in this case, I'm going to say num of sides, right? So my instance variable is equal to whatever was passed in. Okay. So if someone passes in the number 6, then this variable here, num of sides, is going to get the value of 6. Now, the interesting thing is, we don't really know what the face value should be of a die, right? You pull it out of the box, who knows what number is up. So we have to have this ability to randomly set a number. So I'm going to use, rather than create a lot of code to generate a random number, I'm going to reuse something that someone else has already built, and that's the random class. And then my random num generator. That's what this thing will be. So here, I'm going to reuse an existing class. The name that I give for my my object is my random number generator. And here, I'm creating a new instance of a random object. I need to add an import for it because this package doesn't have a random class defined anywhere, so I need to explicitly tell Java where to look for those source files. So here I'll say add import for java.util.random. So now I can say face value, right, is equal to, so I'm going to set the side of my face to my random generator dot, and then this brings up all the possible methods that we can use. And the one that we're going to want in this case is called nextInt. And you can see because this is expecting an int, it actually puts all the integer methods that return integers at the top. And this one's great because it says it returns a pseudo-random, uniformly distributed integer value between 0 and the specified value exclusive. So inclusive and exclusive. So what that means is if I put in a 6, this thing's going to count 0 to 5. Okay? Or if I put in 20, it's going to count 0 to 19. So we'll do that. And as you can see, it actually guessed correctly that we want to use the number of sides. Now the problem here is, because this starts counting at 0, typically dice have numbers like 1 through 6. And if the numbers that my random number generator creates are 0 to 5, right? I need to do some kind of translation here. So if this thing will generate the number 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So if that's what my random number generator produces, I need to translate that. I need to translate that into 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. So the easiest thing is to look at the pattern. So here this set starts at 0 and this one starts at 1. So the difference between 0 and 1 is 1. And then my second one is a 1 goes to 2. So the difference each time is just 1. Right? So if I add plus 1, now my random number generator will give me a random number, or pseudo-random number, between 1 and 6, if I added a 6 here. So now we've created a dice class, we've created some attributes, and we have a constructor that sets our attributes. The next thing we need to do is create our methods. So first method was roll dice. This method will simulate rolling the dice object. Really, when you roll the dice, what happens is you get a new random number that stops on the face. So we're going to do the same thing here. So it's public. Because we have when we go to use these, we'll have an instance of our dice. We no longer use the keyword static. And in this case, we don't even need to return anything. We're just rolling the dice. We're going to set a new face value. We're not going to return it. So our return type is void, and we'll call it roll dice. So in here, really, I need to do the same thing as I did in my constructor. I'm just going to borrow that code, really. So I'm going to create a random number generator, and then I'm going to get some new random number that's within the number of sides of my dice. I like to add these little closing comments as well. Just sometimes it really helps me keep my brackets straight. Okay, and then the last thing we said is we need a method to get the face value. So this method will return the current face value of the dice objects. Okay, so it's going to be public. Again, it does not need to be static, but it's returning the face value of the dice, which is an integer. So our return type here should be int, and let's call this get face value. So we'll just return the face value, right? So really what we're doing here, it almost seems like a trivial thing. Why have a method that has one line of code in it? Well, what this does is, because our instance variable is private, you cannot see the face value unless you have a public way of accessing it. So what this does is it's basically giving us read-only access to the face value of our dice. Okay, so now we've created a dice class. So we have here, let's just zoom out a bit. Right, so there's our class, and then we have some instance variables, and then we have our constructor and 2 methods, and it's the end of our class. So now let's add a testing class. I'm just going to call it testing dice. So here we have our testing class, or testing dice class. And what we want to do is all programs start running in the main method. So we're going to say public static void main, and that's going to be end of the main method. Okay, so now we've created our dice. So if we want to instantiate our dice, in other words, create new dice objects, first we give our data type, which is dice, and then we have to give it a name. So I don't know, let's just call it die 1, because singular of dice is a die, so die 1 is equal to new dice, and let's make it a 6-sided dice. Why is it complaining? It says that constructor dice and dice class cannot be applied to given types. It requires no arguments but a found in integer. Okay. Go back to our dice class. We have some integers. So why isn't it seeing that? Let's close down some of these screens here. Make sure we're looking at the right file. Sometimes if you have a bunch of files open at the same time, what you think you're looking at and what you're actually looking at are two different things. So this one is package dice. Okay. So if it's not seeing this, what we're going to do is go to Run, Clean and Build Project. There we go. And what happens is, and it's rare, but sometimes you'll get some form of corruption or something happening, and you have to do just, it's called the clean and build. So I went to Run, and then I went down to this clean and build project. And that just runs everything, runs the compile checks and everything for us. So let's look at our die here. So I can say system.out.print. Say the initial value on our die is and here we can see all of our methods that are available to our to die. So to dice. So the first one here, because this is technically a string that we're building, it's suggesting the toString method, and it's going to basically return something that doesn't mean a lot to us. It returns a string consisting of the name of the class of which the object is an instance and an @ sign. So it's going to give us something that looks like this. It doesn't look too interesting. But our face value, so it says the method will return the current face value of the dice object. That's the method we created. So let's use that. And we run our program here. It says the initial value of our die is 3. And if I run this again, this time it's a 4. And if I run it again, it's a 1. So you can see our random number generator is creating a random state each time, or pseudo-random, each time we create a new dice object. So let's try a couple other things. Let's roll our dice. So we say die 1 dot, and here we can roll it. Right? We created that method. So if we print it out now, after rolling our die is just put some line returns in here. So LN. So our initial value is 3, and then we roll the dice again, and now we've got a 3. So, you know, this is kind of fun. It's useful. Now we can simulate dice. Well, how are dice used in the real world? Often they're used in games. So let's create a second dice. So now we have 2 dice that we can use, and what we can do is let's see how long or how many rolls it takes to get double ones, also known as snake eyes. Okay, so I did a couple things here. One is I want to have quotes displayed to the screen, so in order to do that, I have to use an escape character. If I just try to print a quote, it would end my string. So this special escape character, this backslash, tells it print this thing to the screen. Okay, so let's look at our logic. Go back to Notepad here, little scratch surface. So if we want to count the amount of times we roll the dice before they both have a face value of 1. So if we want to do that, really, we have we have to have somebody count with, right? So first let's say int, I'll call it the snake eyes counter. Initially it's set to 0 because we don't necessarily have snake eyes yet. And then I'll say while die1 get face value. So if die1 has a value of 1 and die2 has a value of 1, okay, so that means both of these have a value of 1. Okay, that's when I want to stop. So this is sort of almost a little hard to read here, but what I want to get across is if I have the opposite of double ones, so anything but double ones, I want to continue doing a loop. Okay, so while this is not, the exclamation mark means not, so while not double ones, I want my snake eyes counters to go up. Okay, so I'll increase it by 1. I guess that's all we're really going to. Oh, and then what has to happen is, so we have to re-roll the dice each time, right? So if we don't do this, it'll never end. So we'll roll the dice. Oops. And then so I have to tell it for each die, roll it, right? It's like, instead of putting both dice in one hand and rolling it, you have to pick them up one at a time and roll them. We're just simulating dice here. And then at the end, we can say system.out.print. It took so I need to put in here my snake eyes counter. So again, what happens when we use printf, this is for formatted print. Every time it sees percent and then some character after, it's looking for something specific. In the case of percent %d, it's going to look for an integer. So after my comma here is going to be an argument that returns an integer. So my snake eyes counter, whatever number it has, 0 or above 0, will be returned, and that will be substituted into here. Okay, well, let's run our program now. We'll run. Okay, so initially there were 3 and a 2, and it said, let's see how many rolls it takes to get double ones, also known as snake eyes. And you can see it displayed our quotes thanks to the escape characters. And then it had to go through that loop, looks like 22 times before it rolled double ones. And if we do it again, this time it took 46. And if we do it again, it took 1 attempt. So second roll, they got snake eyes. So it's quite a real life simulation that we've got going on here. And we could extrapolate this even further. We could say, well, if I'm going to go to Vegas and snake eyes are bad for the craps table, if I were to bet 100 times, how many times would I get this situation? How are my odds? So to do that, I can actually say, I can set up a for loop, right? So I can say for int counter 1. So this is a count controlled loop, these for loops. So here I can say if I get double ones, so if I get double ones, then let me increase my snake eyes counter. I'll reset it here. So what this will do is our initial state is counting from 1, and each time through the loop it is going to test if this condition is true, whatever's in this middle section. So in this case it says is 1 less than or equal to 100. Well, that's a true statement, so it will do the loop, and inside the loop it's just going to check if we have double ones, and then at the end we need to roll the dice. So okay, so if they are double ones, it's going to increase my counter and then roll the dice, and when we get to the end of the loop, that's when this increment comes into play. So we'll increment the counter plus 1. So if it was 1, it'll now become 2, and it'll test, is 2 less than or equal to 100? It is, so it'll run through the loop, and it'll keep doing this until the counter is 101, in which case it'll say 101 is less than or equal to 100 is a false statement. This will evaluate to false, and it'll jump to the end of the loop. So now we can just print out, and here we'll say we received snake eyes % times in 100 rolls. Okay, let's run our program in C. So looks like first time got a 6 and a 1. Took 0 attempts to get snake eyes, so it doesn't seem correct. And then we received snake eyes 1 time in 100 rolls. Let's run that again. This time it took 30 attempts to get snake eyes, and received it 4 times in 100 rolls. That looks more normal. 3 out of 100. 5 out of 100. Yeah. I don't know what happened that first time. Anyway, so there you have it. So if you're thinking, okay, well, if I'm going to bet 100 times in Vegas, looks like my odds are, 1 in 20, or 5 out of 100 that I'm going to get snake eyes. I hope you enjoyed this session, and we'll see you in class.